Hi, I'm Joe Foyer, and I'm the Executive Director of SID-Washington. We're very proud to be hosting an event with the Columbia University's Institute for the Study of Human Rights for the second year in a row. And we are delighted to have such a distinguished panel today from their Human Rights Advocate program. I'm personally very proud to be hosting this event today as a former alumni of the Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, where I studied human rights under the auspices of the Institute. Just a few words about SID. We are a membership organization with the mission of advancing equitable development by bringing diverse constituencies together to debate critical ideas, policies, and practices that will shape our global future. We like to think of ourselves as the global town square of development, the only place where government, NGOs, the private sector, and academia can come together in a neutral space and really discuss the cutting-edge issues of development. If you aren't already a member, you can join us online at www.sidw.org or by filling out an application form on the table outside this room here. I quickly wanted to point out that we're planning a compelling menu of events for this year. Please check out our website to see a calendar of those events and more information about them. I'll point out one right now. We have our annual dinner on December 7th, at which we'll be honoring former USAID Administrator Andrew Natsio, so please do come to that. Lastly, I wanted to thank very much Stephanie Greppo of the Institute for Study of Human Rights at Columbia for helping us organize today's event. I wanted to thank IFES for hosting us and loaning us this wonderful space to meet in. And lastly, Pat Davis from the Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor Bureau of the State Department for moderating our events. And with that, I will turn over the microphone to Pat, who will introduce the panelists and get us started. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. I don't have a mic. Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, thank you so much for coming to today's panel. I'm very excited to be here. I think that this, as Joe put it, this town square of discussion of development, that this is particularly a discussion that is very dear to my heart, the intersection between human rights and development. As Joe said, I work in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, and as such, I focus on our programs that around the world that support human rights, democracy, including such issues as religious freedom, rights of vulnerable populations, including protection of LGBT people, labor, and we are very much focused on this issue of understanding without the promotion and the protection of human rights, you're not going to have sustainable development around the world. We're very much cognizant of promoting human rights as the U.S. government is not only the right thing to do because it's part of our heritage, but it's also the needed thing to do in order to have sustainable development in the world. And vice versa, we would also say that for human rights, it's about potential. I think that's the key word. It's about releasing the potential of every human being to develop to his or her full potential, to be a constructive member of society, to hold their governments accountable, to basically make governments work for the people and responsive to the people. And without that respect for human rights, you're never going to have that. So that's very much what I do in my daily job. I just came from a panel discussion about a new program that we're doing to protect the rights of LGBT people and document human rights abuses in Southern Africa. And I will have to sneak out of here early. I have a meeting to talk with some people at the European Command at the Department of Defense to talk about how you reach out and work with NGOs and our security policies. So I do the whole spectrum. And I'm very pleased to be here to moderate today and to hear from our distinguished panelists who I had a chance to meet very, very briefly beforehand to hear about their work. And then we will have a discussion at the end. I think what I would like to do is to allow them each to introduce themselves, and then I think, did you have a particular order? We didn't actually nail this down. We'll just go down the row to have them introduce each other before they give their speech. So we'll just start with our colleague here from Bosnia. Introduce yourself, and then we'll go down the row. Thank you very much. And I think we want to hold questions off till the end. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm very delighted to be here and have the opportunity to talk about the work that I do personally, but also to hear more about what my colleagues do all around the world. As you will see, at least I find our stories very interesting, and I hope that they will also inspire you to look at in a different way to human rights work and its relation to development. In the Human Rights Advocates program, this year I'm representing, as you heard, Bosnia and Herzegovina, or to be more clear, the Association of Young Lawyers that works in the country where I'm currently serving as a co-president. So it's a voluntary work. And the association was established back in 2008 as we needed to sort of have a legal ground to do human rights work in the country, and as it turned out, maybe even more internationally than we thought at the beginning. Basically in 2006 and in 2005, I had the opportunity to go to 2 summer schools that were organized by Georgetown University, which is actually based here in Prague in Greece, and that sort of gave me the idea of how educative and exciting for, international programs could be, and how much you can learn from other international students if you're in the same room with them. So when I came back home to Sarajevo in 2005, at the end of the year, we started within the law school. There was an organization of law students. We started working on the idea of having basically first international summer school Sarajevo, and in Bosnia and Herzegovina that was created for the social sciences students. In 2008, we discovered that we need to sort of professionalize our work a bit better. So that's how we created this Association of Young Lawyers. And we continued working on raising awareness on violations of human rights, but through the summer school project, which is called International Summer School Sarajevo, and which turned out to be sort of like regional brand in terms of the region of Southeast Europe, because we managed to develop a very good program that brought 150 alumni in the last 5 years. So the first one that happened in 2006 was sort of a pilot project which continued to work until 2011. As of 2008, we have been focusing on very important issues for the region that I come from, but I would say that they're globally very important: rule of law, transitional justice, and human rights. And the reason why we started doing that work was the fact that none of these topics are even today, 5 years after, they're not being discussed in public universities. So I find that, for example, students that study here, they're very privileged to be able to take, academic courses on these topics, because even though for people, let's say in the Balkans or in some other parts of the world, transitional justice becomes sort of a lifestyle. We did not have a chance to learn about it, but it's like you hear in the news about work of International Criminal Tribunal for ex-Yugoslavia, or you hear about, like what is happening in terms of role that international organizations are taking, but you don't really know how you call all of that. And then we sort of came to the idea, okay, let's create a program that will be educative enough and to provide young people with this additional knowledge that was missed out in the formal education. So even though our focus was to bring first people from former Yugoslavia and ensure communication between countries that have been torn apart with the conflict, we also were very interested in bringing people from Bulgaria, Romania, who are more emerging democracies than post-conflict countries, but of course they also shared so many common fields or problems that we had. And then we didn't stop there, but we continued bringing also people from Western Europe. And then, for example, last year we had a wonderful discussion between people from Southeast Europe and person representing Spain, who talked about consequences of civil war in Spain and how it's still affecting what is happening in the country today. So we have been having these never-ending discussions and opportunity to learn from each other, and also to spread the word about what we do and what our alumni do. We started publishing an international journal on rule of law, human rights, and transitional justice, So the first edition was published last year, and then we're continuing this work, and basically has it's a set of articles on some of these topics that we find very important in the countries that we work in.
Thank you very much. Let's move on now to our colleague from Uganda.
Rwanda.
Oh, Rwanda, I'm sorry. Apologies.
Actually, we are
Rwanda.
neighbors.
Yes. I have to confess, Joe, I don't have a list of the participants. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry about that. It's my job as a moderator. Okay.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you all. It's really my pleasure to be here today to talk about not Rwanda, but somehow about Rwanda, and especially about my organization. My name is Mr. Elvis Mbembe Binda. I'm from Rwanda, as I said. I've been recently elected as the president of a local NGO called Initiative for Peace and Human Rights. That's a NGO which has been created when we are still at university as students. It started as a student organization just to discuss human rights issues at university. Later on, we came to decide that when we graduated, why not just try to make it something sustainable? Because we found that really people needed. As we graduated, we found that people could need our services. We could discuss at a national level these things of human rights. Though, that's how in 2006, we went in Kigali, and we tried now to find a license to work nationwide. So our organization, though, was not really very well known, because we're just working on, say, informal way. Right. So last year in 2010, then we decided to have now a strategic plan for the 5 coming years. So we have defined our strategic plan, and now we are just trying to work through our strategic plan. And the strategic plan I'm telling you about currently has identified 24 projects that we are trying to implement. And with, these 24 projects are actually around 4 pillars, because our organization works around 4 thematic areas, which are good governance, human rights, peace building and reconciliation. You know that in Rwanda we need it, and access to justice. So these are the pillars of our organization, and we work in many ways. We organize trainings for students, but especially for good governance, we organize also training for local authorities, because our target group actually is these local people, grassroots people, but also local authorities, because we believe that if these people can understand their right, if local authorities can understand that they are in the offices, not because just they are there to be paid, but because of the people, we say that this can make a change. And our strategy and our focus is unique in the region, simply because we are the only organization in the region, not only in Rwanda, but also in the Great Lakes, which actually focuses on human rights and good governance education. So for us, we think that good governance and human rights education can build a sustainable peace for not only Rwanda, but also for the whole region. We have carried out a number of activities. I will not just go in details, but yearly, we have almost 400 persons who are direct beneficiaries of our services. We have a lot of challenges, and the most important one, I think, as many people can say, are funding. So how do we fund our activities? We have 129 members in the 3 countries. Oh, I didn't mention that we have now a branch in Burundi and another one in Eastern Congo. It's a small organization without funds, but with committed people. We say that we'll not wait for funds to start working. So we have started with the 129 members that we have. Every member contributes $15 yearly. So with that, we carry some of our activities. And when we have really brilliant ideas, we go to government institutions like the Human Rights Commission of Rwanda or the Good Governance Advisory Committee Council, where we can tell them about our project, then we can carry out this project together. So this is a few words what we do, and maybe later when I have the time, now I'll show you the link between human rights, the work we do, and the development, how we really experiment it at the grassroots level. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to Nadia, who comes from Colombia, and I'll let you introduce your organization.
Thank you. And thank you, the Society for International Development, to give us this opportunity of exchange our ideas between what it is this development and human rights. So I'm Nadia Bazán. I'm Colombian. I work with a women's organization. It's the Urgent Action Fund of Latin America. We are based in Colombia, but we work in the whole Latin American continent and in the Spanish-speaking Caribbean countries as well. What we do is to support the diversity of women's organizations. And when I say the diversity of women, I'm including the lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and queer organizations. And we support them through a model of funding that we called rapid response grants. What's that? A rapid response grant is given when the organization discovers an opportunity through an unforeseen, unexpected situation in the context where they can have an option to promote their rights or to protect a specific right that is in danger using a short-term action, what we call an urgent request. And for these kind of actions, they need small amounts of money, but they need them quickly in order not to lose that opportunity. And what kind of situations, what type of situations are those unforeseen situations I'm talking about? For example, in Ecuador and Bolivia, they recently revised their constitutions, so several women's organizations and LGBTIQ organizations get together in order to prevent that specific rights that were already entitled in the previous constitutions just flew away because of new priorities, and to, of course, promote that new rights could come into the new constitutions. In Honduras, for example, as I imagine that you know that in 2009 there was a military coup, so many women's organizations started to be targeted, to be threatened, because they were visibilizing the political instability of the country. So several grants were given in order to provide security and protection measures to these women human rights defenders and their organizations. For this kind of short-term actions, traditional funding is not an option, because usually selection processes takes long, the requirements are sometimes quite complicated, so this is why the Urgent Action Fund of Latin America works 365 days a year. We don't have a call for proposals. We understand that an emergency can come the 24th of December, during Christmas, or in any time of the year, and we are able to support an urgent request, of course, after all the due diligence and selection process, within 72 hours. We've supported since 2009, when it was funded in Colombia, 70 grants in 16 countries. We would be able to do more if we had enough funding and enough collaboration. And well, here is where I invite all of you to join us in the support of women human rights defenders in the country. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Let's move on to Rita Mainaly from Nepal.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rita. I'm from Nepal. I work with one organization named Center for Legal Research and Resource Development. It's called CELOD, which is established in 1998. The main objective of this organization is to promote human rights and gender justice through various training, advocacy, and education. So here I mean to education is mean that we have established one law school to foster human rights education with the objective that if there is legal education, everybody will be able to know about their rights. So, so they are able to fight against injustice. And we have an organization that is a mother organization that we call CELOD. So it has manifold activities, like we have criminal justice reform program, and we have violence against women program, and also we have many trainings and activities program. Then if we go through the web page, it is www.celrrd.org. We can find many activities and objectives over there. But in short, what I'm trying to highlight here is, like, if we are focusing on criminal justice system, then we have activities like we have a training program for judges, justice sector actors, in fact, for judges, for public prosecutors, and for police, and for defense lawyers too. So we have a training program. We developed manuals, training manual first, and then we provide training for them. And also we have violence against women program. Again, here we developed some training manuals for the grassroots people, and we will train them, and we just set up a committee in grassroots level, thinking that if they have their one committee, they could fight more against the injustice. So we try to involve them for themselves. So we have a paralegal training for those community people, and also we have we set up clinics to provide legal aid for the needy people. So we have actually 2 legal aid clinics. One is for prisoners and one is for victims or survivors of violence against women. So we have 2 clinics. And if we talk about the research activities of CELOD, then we have conducted the criminal justice necessity of criminal justice reformation, and we have fair trial program, research on fair trial standard, and we have research on access to justice for women on the what is called like on the process of criminal justice, because women are far behind to get access for the fair way. So we had a research on this issue too, and we have research on juvenile justice, and so many research we have been conducting. And talking about law schools, we have a program like Winter School Program on economic, social, and development rights. We have been running for a long time, and this time the 8th residential school is ongoing over there. And also we have clinical legal education program to aware students, mostly focusing on the junior students, to make them community responsive and to make them aware about their professional duties. Thank you very much for the well, and I will be interested later.
Okay, thank you, Rita. And now, last but not least, we'll turn to Ifeanyi from Nigeria to talk about his program at the International Center for Advocacy on Rights to Health.
Thank you very much, Patricia. My name is Ifeanyi Orazulike. I'm from Nigeria. I work with the International Center for Advocacy on Rights to Health, formerly known as Alliance Rights Nigeria. Ackar was formed in 1999 to conduct research, international laws affecting gay and lesbian people in Nigeria. And in 2010, we got registered with the Nigerian government after we were asked to change the name of the organization, which we did. But Ackar was formed with a group of 10 gay men living with HIV and AIDS in Nigeria in 1999. When HIV was at the peak of it, killing gay people and also lesbian people. And then the group of friends came together and said, you know what, it is time for us to organize ourselves together and start looking at this from the public health perspective. And after which, 2 years later, it was turned into a formal organization where we started running part-time programs, doing peer education workshops, and also doing human rights documentation in Nigeria. Over the years, with or no resources, we've been able to achieve a lot of results in Nigeria, and also given the context of the challenging situation in Nigeria at the moment, where we have the same-sex prohibition bill at the National Assembly, and the public hearing was yesterday, which the response wasn't favorable at all. And then Ackar has been able in the last 10 years. Right now we're on a community center where we have our activities, our indoors activities. Even when we have commemoration events, we don't do them on the street, but we do them at the community center because of the situation in the country. We also run an LGBTI clinic for gay men living with HIV, and also for counseling services for LGBTI people in Nigeria. And the clinic is about 6 months old, and at the moment we have 500 people who has been registered with the clinic and also benefit from the services that are being provided. And I would also say a very big thank you to the US government, who is supporting our prevention program for gay men in Nigeria only. And also the clinic is being supported by the Institute of Human Virology, which is run by the University of Maryland in Baltimore. Given the context of what we do in Nigeria, it's been so challenging and difficult to get people to understand what our rights are. And then LGBTI rights are human rights, and we are not demanding for special rights. So the organization And one of his objectives is conducting research, doing trainings, and also doing campaigns and advocacy work into national and existing laws that affect sexual minorities. And then we started looking at that from the public health perspective. But you can talk about public health without talking about human rights. You actually can divorce the two of them because they are interwoven. But looking at that, recently the same-sex prohibition bill talked about same-sex prohibition marriage. We are not talking about marriage. We are talking about right to health, freedom of association, and assembly. So these are part of the things we are trying our argument from that angle. And then we've been able to do a lot in terms of organizing the community, getting people to understand how to document human rights violations, because there are lots of human rights violations in Nigeria happening even on the ground, and then the communities are not able to report those issues. And that is why we have the organization trying to provide this education and trainings to the community members who are faced with this. Recently, 2 weeks ago, we have a landlord evicted 2 tenants from his compound who just moved in on the ground of perceived that they are gay people. And then these are big issues, because even at that, I know if not only in Nigeria but in West Africa, there is no much resources to do human rights program. But I know we have resources to do HIV and AIDS interventions among men who have sex with men. So looking at these issues, first of all, the landlord doesn't even have any right to evict his tenants, because as far as they pay, they have the right of occupancy. And these are part of the issues that we are working around, and then looking at the situation of Nigeria and also other countries, other neighboring countries where we work at right now. And this is beginning to affect not only Nigeria, but it's happening in lots of African countries. Ghana is also facing the same issues in terms of same-sex prohibition bill in Ghana, and the one in Uganda just came back again. So these are part of the things we are doing, and then maybe when I'm yet to give my speech, we'll look more into details on how these issues affect countries like ours and how we're able to provide the services we provide in a challenging context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentations. I have to say I'm humbled. This has been a fabulous group to hear about their work, and I must say I've never seen such a great group of people who have a grasp of the needs of a comprehensive approach to the respect and promotion of human rights, anywhere from understanding the need for awareness raising and education to advocacy to actually trying to help with concrete help with small grants, emergency grants, to help people do their work. I think there were also some themes that struck me that came across all of the presentations, and one of them was justice. I mean, it's very clear, again, access to justice, transitional justice, being able to stand up for the rights of LGBT or human rights, being able to get respect for those human rights is a key part of anything that we do, both as the donor side and in the countries that are undergoing development. I also think that, again, what I find amazing in these approaches that we've heard about today is the cross-national nature of it, the cross-border nature of it, the idea of lessons learned, of saying, I'm intrigued by the idea of bringing people in from Spain to learn about the consequences of civil war and the long-standing consequences of it, or learning how other countries dealt with it, or how to avoid worst practices. I think this is key for the work of promoting human rights. The idea that there has to be diversity, again, it ranges from LGBT to women to students, that it's this understanding. It's not a narrow section of life that you look at when you're promoting human rights. And lastly, to just say, though, that you've been able to accomplish all of these things, which I'm sure are very small budgets. That I know that funding for human rights out there is usually very, very small. And we are acutely aware of that. And I commend you for being able to do what you can, marshaling your own resources from contributions from members to understanding the connection to, for example, health and development, and how you can use that to advocate for the rights of LGBT. I think that this is a fantastic group of people, and I thank SID-Washington for putting this together, as well as Columbia University for bringing these people here. I just want to make 2 plugs, since I am from the U.S. government. that there are documentations out there that do explain the President Obama's approach to human rights and to development, and I would urge you to take a look at it if you try to get a better grasp of what his policies and Secretary Clinton's policies are. First is a speech that Secretary Clinton gave in Georgetown in December of 2009, where she clearly lays out the connection between human rights and development and the need to be able to protect human rights as a way of unleashing potential, as a way of having sustainable development. Then President Obama released his own national security strategy. Every president releases a national security strategy. President Obama released his in May of 2010. It's on the White House webpage, where he has a whole section devoted to the promoting human rights and democracy abroad, again, laying out not just the need to protect human rights and that it's in the interests of the United States to protect human rights morally, because that's what we do, but as he says, I just wanted to quote here, the United States supports the expansion of democracy and human rights abroad because governments that respect these values are not just peaceful, are more peaceful, just, and legitimate. And I think that's something, again, that we have to keep in mind here. It's about the development, the sustainability of moving people forward. And then lastly, I think you should be pleased to know that President Obama signed a presidential directive and released it on Presidential Directive on Global Development that he signed just a month and a half ago now, September 2011, that he rolled out when he gave his speech at the UN General Assembly. I would urge you to take a look at that too, that talks about our principles of development. And lastly, the State Department has what's called humanrights.gov, www.humanrights.gov, where we try to put all the documents that are relevant to human rights that come from the U.S. government on that. So now that I've done my advertisement, let me turn it over to the audience. I'm sure there are lots of questions there. May I ask, I guess, that you speak up loudly and perhaps introduce yourselves? I don't know if there's a mic intended for the audience. Maybe my mic? Yes. I will try and talk loudly. Do we have a question in the back?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Okay.
My name is Jannat Malkan and I do women, peace, and security work. I was also in the human rights program at Colombia a couple of years ago, so I know you guys do really great work. My question is relating to some of the challenges that you have faced in doing your work in the field. If you could talk briefly about some of the challenges that you have faced, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we take a couple of questions? I see another one here.
Sarah Danish, work in international development with a focus on Latin America. Thanks for your presentations. Elvis, you spoke about working with local authorities, and I'm curious how you set up those mechanisms and also some of the impact of the current work you do with those authorities. How are you seeing that and how are you measuring impact with them? Maybe others want to speak to that if they have an experience with working with government.
All right, and maybe, is there a third? I'm sorry, okay.
One more. My name is Ackar Libali, visiting fellow at UMass Boston. A quick question to the Bosnian expert. There is a right of internally displaced people to repatriate home in the Dayton Accords. How is that? What do you do regarding that, in implementing that and in pursuing that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we let Lana just answer that question on Bosnia first. The question was about the rights of IDPs to return home. That was enshrined in Dayton. And is your group or people in Bosnia or in the Balkans region working on that?
Yeah, once I start answering this question, I think this would probably be the most difficult one. Yes, you're right. I mean, according to the Dayton Peace Agreement, the right to return is guaranteed. From my organization is not working directly with it, but through some of my colleagues, I do know that definitely within the last 2 years there have been certain progress made in terms of making this more formalized, because as you may know, strategy for implementation of Annex 7, which is dedicated to the return process, was revised by the Ministry of Human Rights, and it took a long time until it actually went through the parliament. It went once and then it was returned, of course, due to many political reasons. So now the strategy, the revised version of it, it started its implementation in 2010. But since we don't have, at the moment, since general elections that happened in October last year, we still don't have state level government. So, like implementation of the strategy, unfortunately, is still pending along with the work of the Commission for Displaced Person and Return of Property. So unfortunately, that's one of the, I think, the most difficult and very critical issues that Bosnia and Herzegovina will probably be dealing in the following several years. So those are just the updates. Unfortunately, I cannot say that there's more than, than this new framework for it, but yeah, that's it. There are some efforts, but implementation is actually at a very low level.
Okay, thank you. And let me then turn to our panelists. I think the question of the challenges that civil society and NGOs face in doing their work, and particularly in sensitive areas such as human rights, is, I think, a very key question, because this is an area where you have to be careful, where I do know from my own experience that people's lives can be put in danger in some of the work that you do. So I would ask you to not only talk about the challenges you face, but what ways you overcome them, and maybe are there ways that the international donor community and development organizations might be able to help you in overcoming those challenges? And then secondly, how do you work with the local authorities? I guess how actually the mechanics of that, which again I think is impressive, of understanding many times you can't get anything done at the national level because there's an impasse, or it's just too hot button issue. But many times you find that at the local level there are more sympathetic local authorities who might be willing to work on this because they understand the need to. I mean, they're much closer to it. That's where the rubber meets the road. So how do you do that? And then again, I think the question is near and dear to everybody's heart who is involved in programming. How do you know that you've had success? How do you measure that impact?
Yes,
Okay. Go ahead, start.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like just to start with the question. I think I'll address this question of challenges after addressing the one of local authorities, because I think that will be more logical. So to address what the mechanism that we use to work with local authorities, the first thing is that in Rwanda, for instance, to get your organization working, you need a license. First of all, they give you a temporary license to function. And when you go to the district level, the first question they ask you before they give you that temporary license, they ask you, how will we as a district benefit from your organization? So that's the first question. It means that when you are submitting your requests of license, you need to show exactly how the districts will benefit from your organization. So in our strategic plan, the first thing you need to show, especially that our organization, which is also focusing on good governance, you need to focus to show how, for instance, the staff of the district will benefit from some training that you will organize. So this one. Second, my organization signs, I think this is something specific to my organization. We have already signed almost, I think, 6 MOUs with the district where we operate from. So this is also our way, apart from the license that we have to operate, we go to the district because, as I told you, our target is these grassroots people. And most of them in Rwanda, you have the district, after district, you have the agglomeration and the cell. So the direct authority is the executive secretary of the district. So we signed the MOU saying how our activities will be carried out, what do we expect from the districts, and what are the people actually we are targeting. So just to measure the impact, I would like to talk just about a project. This is one of our interesting projects, what we call the Mobile Legal Aid Clinic. That project helps us to go in remote areas where poor people are living. Those people have a lot of legal related issues. So instead of us waiting for them in Kigali or in cities, we go to these people. We collect their problems. We try to understand their problem and we try to give it a legal figure, a legal visage. Then we help them understanding it. Then in the end, we organize in two stages. The first stage is on Mondays, we go to them, we collect the problems. Tuesday and Wednesday, people work on it, try to understand what's the legal problem. And on Thursday now, we carry out what we call the kind of human rights education. After collecting these issues, we try to see what are the major issues which are coming back from the people. We see, for example, we have an issue related to succession law, something related to research of paternity, something related to contract, to genocide, and so on. So before we address specific cases that we received, what we do, we try to talk to all of them. What are the Rwandan laws related to these different issues? So they see just like a group, we tell to them, this is what we call for us, human rights education. So after that, now we see what are the cases that need a kind of close follow-up. We can take it down to court, we can assign lawyers, but now we don't have enough funds to assign lawyers. But we have the chance that in our executive committee, 7 persons out of 8 are practicing lawyers. So every person takes at least 1 case per month that he can follow up. So for us, this really creates an impact. And this is how now I want really to link human rights and development, how it operates in my own country, the way I experience it with my organization. I have a case of a lady who has been raped by her mother's uncle. Several times to the extent that she had 2 kids. The 2 kids, actually, the family did not want really this problem to be addressed in a public. So she was living there and no one actually even could come to help her children, not even a member of the family. So she was alone facing the charges of the survival of these children. When we went there, she came to us, she exposed our problem. We listened to her, then we went to her family. The family said, we don't want to address the criminal issue of it because in Rwanda, at that time, even she was even minor. That would lead to a criminal case for rape. So the only thing, you can go to the judge and try to establish the paternity link between the kid and the person so that they can get a kind of alimony. We did that. And in the end, we won the case, and the judge decided that that lady will be receiving 5,000 Rwanda francs. It's something like 10 USD per month to help these kids at least to have access to food, to pay their school fees, so things like that. For us, when we look at this, which really, we have made an impact. There's a change in that specific life. And this is not only the only case we deal with. So we see these kind of things happening. We can help people getting them from the prison because they've been accused wrongly. So this is how I can say how we measure the impact of our collaboration with local authorities. Because if we did not have this MOU, we could not really have that, how do you say it, to work easily in the areas. So now let's talk about the challenge. The first challenge, you know, Rwanda is a country which is just from genocide, only 17 years ago. It's too early. So we have a law which is called the Law Against the Genocide Ideology. That law is somehow what we can call a kind of a sea without borders. Everything you can do to Rwanda today, depending on how another person understands it, can easily be judged as a genocide ideology. And for us specifically, when we're working with these different issues, you can easily, if you are not careful, if the government is not really pleased with what you are doing, or if you are doing a report which is against the government policy, you can easily be put in the basket of genocide ideology and face criminal proceedings. And in the end, you can be in jail. So this is one of our most important challenge, how to carry out our activities independently, but also respecting the policy of the government. This is the most important. But also another one, as I told you, my organization is not really big. Our ideas, we think big, but we just try to act very small to make a difference there. As I said at the beginning, just on the specific case of mobile legal aid clinic, we collect yearly something like 325 cases. But we can only deal with 90 cases, which represent 25 cases. So the most important, the second most important challenge is the funds. How to get funds to help these people, because most of these cases, like the one I just talked about, is almost at the border with Burundi. And to have access there, you need to take either a motorcycle or to wake up early in the morning, as the bus goes only there early in the morning and comes back from there in the evening. So it's an area that many people do not go there. So, but if you have funds, you can, enough funds, we can easily go there, make these people, help them enjoy better, their lives. I think I've addressed these questions. Thank you. If there's something that you need, I can add. It will be my pleasure. Thank you.
Nadia, do you want to
Yes.
respond to some of this?
Yes. To the challenges that we face on our daily work. Well, I would like to underline a little bit the idea of security. In Colombia, for example, women's human rights defenders, labor unions, journalists are being threatened almost every day. In Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, I think it's not a secret for anybody that security situation is really an issue. There are many things that are happening, and for defenders, things are really even worse. But despite this situation, it seems that Latin America is not a priority anymore for international organizations that works on human rights. So here it comes the other part of the challenge, which is working on human rights without funding and without support from outside. So here it comes again. We use this history of the chicken. I would like to bring it here. Is from I'm stealing it from a colleague. Is that if I'm a Colombian woman that eats a whole chicken today, and you're a Colombian woman that eats nothing, in tomorrow's official statistics, we eat average per day half of a chicken. So why to help this country that has, in average, it's a middle income country, and that's how we are seeing outside. We have Carlos Slim in Mexico, who is among one of the richest person in the world, but we also have right next to his door people that is starving. So how do we visualize these situations in our countries regarding poverty and regarding human rights violations as well? So those are two challenges we're facing easily everywhere all the time. So how to overcoming? I will demand from you to understand our situations, to get closer what is happening in our context, and to, if it comes to you, to support also our struggles and our fights.
Rita?
Thank you very much. The challenges that we have been facing in my personal experiences and my organization's experience is like that. Nepal is predominantly influenced by Orthodox Hindu value system. So there are discrimination between men and women, not in the law, but in the mindset of the people. So the patriarchal mindset is a very, the challenge for us. Because if I am representing some organization and people look like I'm nobody, and if there is a male in my place and he is somewhere there, and people say that, whoa, he is there, he is from such organization. So this is one. And one of other challenges is like that we have two images of same women. Like this value is worship a girl child or a woman as a goddess. And we have another image is that women are always known as witch. So this dichotomy makes, very, very difficult for us to work in the community. And another challenge is like that it is also influenced by the patriarchal value that women have no independent identity. And if we talk about the right to citizenship, then people, basically the political leaders, they defend like that, no, we can't give women the right to identity, a right to citizenship. If we gave them right to citizenship to transfer by their name, then there will be the people from another country here in Nepal, because we have an open border with India. So most probably the Indians, they will come in Nepal and they occupied Nepal. So they don't have a border taking policy, but they said that no, we can't give women this right. So this is another challenge for us. And Also, the security problem is there in Nepal because there are many armed groups, small armed groups in Nepal, still in some parts of Nepal. So, if we go there, there may be the chance to be kidnapped or killed by those groups. So, this is also the challenges for us to face. Thank you.
Thank you. Ifeanyi?
Thank you very much. Looking at the issue of challenges, it's a whole long list. Talking about it, my first experience personally, I lost my first job because of my sexual orientation, and that was what gave birth to the work I'm doing today. And then you can imagine how many people out there in Africa or in Nigeria who faces the same issue. And looking at it, 14th December 2010, I got attacked in my apartment where I live because of the work I do. You know, and then these are a whole long list of issues that people face, particularly talking about your sexual orientation. Being gay or being lesbian has not really been easy. And then also with the kind of work we do, our office is located in a residential in a residential area. We can't have our office in a commercial area where everybody has their offices because of the issue of attacks and security. And like Nadia said, security is the utmost priority, particularly for human rights defenders. Because I not only have gotten attacked, before I got attacked, I already have received threats, mail, phone calls from people I don't even know because of how outspoken I've been, you know, doing the work that I'm doing. But the way to get around it, possibly that we've tried our possible best, is ensuring that we don't do public, we don't go out publicly to announce or to advertise the work that we do. But we have a network of people doing it through social media networks, like using gay sites, phone calls. We do a lot of SMSing, you know, telling the community members about our activities, which is a huge challenge, given the context of Nigeria and also other African countries. It's been really, really difficult. And also, the basic challenge also includes legal aid, because a lot of people get arrested. Another thing that is the order of the day in Nigeria is blackmail. Blackmail has gone a long way in our community because of the sodomy law. People take advantage of that, and then there are lots of people who work in banks, who work in other wealthy organizations, and then when it's perceived in their community that they are gay, people tend to say, okay, you see that you give me money, or I go to the public, and then police harassment, arresting people, and then not even having the resources to hire lawyers to seek justice to this community. So one of my recommendations would be looking at legal aid, looking at security for human rights defenders, doing lots of trainings. And also, I think another thing that that has always been in my mind is, because the region where we come from, and then we are people who are faced with this peculiarity of issues, getting countries to start talking about it. Because I know that there are countries who are progressive. South Africa should be one of the countries, and then there are also some of other countries that it is actually very silent, it's not being talked about. But getting countries to start talking about these issues, because we have common enemy, which is religion, culture, that people talk about using culture and using religion to attack LGBTI people and saying homosexuality is un-African. But while we all know that homosexuality is African, because if not with the colonial laws that were bestowed on us, that means homosexuality in the past ever existed. If it didn't exist, there wouldn't be a ban to homosexuality. And we know in Uganda that one of the kings in those days, in the 19th century or so, was gay. So these are things that are not a Western ideology, but it is something that has existed in our community. I am a gay man. Before I even found out I was gay, I never met any white person. So the idea of people thinking it is un-African, it is a borrowed culture, it's something we should start talking about and start doing research into existing laws and looking back from where we are coming from. How did this come into being? Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, and Lana?
Yeah. Well, I'll just go very briefly to the question: how do you measure impact? I think that's a very, very difficult thing when you do human rights work. And I know that all of my colleagues could, including myself, could throw you in with numbers, you know, like how many grants were given and how many cases of legal aid was offered. But at the end of the day, I think that, you know, you have this multiplying effect of things you do, and it's really important to keep doing this work. For example, from my own experience, I know that every year we have several, for example, participants of the summer school who come and tell me like, well, you know, this is the first time that I'm learning something about human rights, or I want to learn something about rule of law. And I know that every year, for example, we end up the program with several people telling me, you know what, I'll continue doing this. And I know some of them, for example, started their master studies in human rights, which means that, you know, we do spread a word, and we do affect at least, you know, like awareness on human rights education in this case, or, you know, like, or we do in a way change lives of people, and then, you know, their children, and so on and so on. So I think we cannot sometimes really see, you know, like the entire image of the impact. We know that there is some, but I think it's very difficult to say, yeah, to put it in numbers.
Okay, thank you. I think, again, those are very helpful responses, and the issue of security being the utmost priority, I think, is something that all donors and development organizations do need to take to heart, to understand that, well, obviously we should live by the do no harm rule, but that means that we shouldn't then back off from doing anything because we think it's too dangerous. Our rule is always, the groups on the ground, the individuals on the ground, they know best what the risks are. What we need to do is figure out the best way to help mitigate those risks, whether it be through training or legal assistance. I know that, for example, President Clinton has been putting a lot of emphasis on internet freedom, and a lot of what that is training on security, on how to safely use social media. It's not just access to the internet, but it's how to use the internet safely, or how to use social networking, communication, and information technology safely and securely, so that people don't get into trouble. Are there more questions? Right here in the middle.
Hi, this question is for Ifeanyi. My name is Jumoke, and I was wondering, it seems a little easier to counter federal policy or state policy. How do you engage the community in general?
Now, are you talking about the gay community or the community at large?
Not publicizing a lot of things that you do, but is there an effort to actually have people learn and, you know, just engage them until they better understand that this is not a Western?
Yeah, we do a lot of that in terms of when we do our advocacy, and then also when we do our trainings. But, you know, it is a continuous process, because getting people to get rid of their thinking. Like, a typical example of that is what happened at the National Assembly yesterday during the public hearing. We found out that the church had more resources and then mobilized against the gay community, even having children, teaching them hate. But when we talk about the state actors and the non-state actors of this discrimination and so on, you know, having children who even do not understand what human rights is all about, what gay rights is all about, wearing t-shirt and saying homosexuality is un-African, this is ungodly, and then XYZ, you know, going back and front on it. And I know even the Nigerian constitution says that by no means would they choose any religion as the state religion. But I found out, reading the report from yesterday's event, the senators were throwing questions at the LGBT activists who were at the public hearing on religious grounds. How do we deal with that? So these are things we keep talking about every day, doing trainings, but it depends on how much resources you have to be able to convey trainings and do much more than you can. We can only just do the much we can with the little resources we have. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mel Schnapper, a dependent consultant in the field of international development. I just returned from what used to be Somalia, dealing with the 4 different Somali entities. And like you, a lot of people I talked about changing institutions with a lot of training, which is probably the least valuable way to train institutions. And I heard several of you mention training and workshops, which are, you know, easy to put on and it accounts for your budget. But how many of you are focusing on changing institutions from the inside rather than putting hundreds or even thousands of people through various training programs?
So I guess the question is, if we want to see real change, it can't come about just by training people on the outside. How are we affecting? Someone want to jump in on that?
Okay. If I just want to address vis-a-vis what we do, because I said that my organization works for human rights and good governance education. So when we talk about institutions, I directly see good governance, because the administration, bad administration or poor governance has been for long a problem of African issues we are facing. So what we mean by strengthening institutions, we just try to train at our level, I said, local authorities. If those people can start at least understanding the reason why they are sitting behind a desk on a daily basis, for us we think that this is even the beginning of the building up of that strong institution we mean. Thank you.
Yeah, and I also strongly believe that, you know, once the other side of, let's say, just ordinary citizens realize what are the duties and responsibilities that institutions or governmental authorities have, then they will demand those. And at the end of the day, if you have, for example, coming from Bosnia and Herzegovina, I know that a lot of efforts have been done by the international community to ensure, you know, like institutional reform, and to build up capacities of institutions or to change them in a way. But also, if you have pressure coming from the other side, from the citizens, that sort of reminds the institutions all the time that they have to act, you know, like in a much better way than they would be, for example, if you don't have this you know, constant need coming from the citizens. I hope it responds your
Question here.
Hi, I wanted to thank all the panelists for coming today, and this question specifically goes to the State Department. I was wondering what the State Department sees as their role when they're in these countries and they see these human rights abuses. Do they see their role as more of approaching government or approaching the civil society actors in the communities and promoting human rights in that way? Or is it maybe a two-pronged approach?
Okay, well, I'm not a presenter. I'm happy to take that question. The question was about the role of the State Department when we see and we witness these human rights abuses, and what do we do? It is very much, it's a dual approach, and I was talking to some of the activists before. Obviously, we have relations with government, so that is, I won't want to say number one, but that is definitely an approach we would take, that we would go in and approach governments and raise our concerns with them when we hear about people being beaten up, jailed, or when we hear about possible bad legislation coming down the pike, discriminatory language. That we would definitely raise this with government officials. That's in fact what our embassies' pretty much full-time jobs are, to talk to the other governments on the ground. So this is done by our embassies on the ground, but we also do it here in Washington. Many times we will have the ambassador from country X come in and we'll say we're very concerned about what's been happening in your country. And then of course you have the president and you have the secretary or the administrator at AID. They raise this in their public speeches as well. I mean, that is also publicly signaling our concerns. I also want to point out, though, and I was explaining this before, that many times it may look like the U.S. government or any other government may tend to be being silent on a particular topic. You don't see them reacting publicly on something. Many times that's because we are doing a lot behind the scenes. And the way I like to explain it, it's a simple psychological phenomenon. Nobody wants to appear like they're being bullied publicly and that they are backing down because they have been bullied. So a lot of times we raise these things behind closed doors and find that we can many times be much more effective by raising the issue behind closed doors. And this is particularly the case for individual things, like people have been put in jail, or many times when we've heard that this government is going to criminalize homosexuality, that it's much more effective for us to raise it behind closed doors, because that gives the other government a chance to respond without having to publicly appear like they have been ordered to do so by some outside pressure. We also work multilaterally. We work with other governments many times, both publicly and privately, to go in and talk to governments. We use international organizations, the Human Rights Commission, Organization of American States, OSCE. We take advantage of international organizations. So we do the government-to-government side, but we are also very much engaged on the individual side with the organizations and with the groups. Again, every U.S. embassy around the world, everyone has a human rights officer. So there's somebody whose full-time job, well, sometimes not full-time job, but somebody's job is to track human rights development and to do outreach to individuals and human rights groups. We regularly engage with them. The ambassador regularly would be engaging and having him in, inviting him in for events. I know that we're pretty active during Gay Pride, that we do, a lot of our embassies do Gay Pride events around the world, or they would be engaging in something during Human Rights Week, International Human Rights Week, or International Human Rights Day, or International Women's Rights Day or month. So we do that. And the secretary has engaged in, she created what's called the Strategic Civil Society Dialogue, that is to parallel the strategic dialogues that she has with governments around the world. So we have strategic dialogues with China. Well, she has a strategic dialogue meeting with Chinese activists. The idea is to say it's not just about engaging governments, engaging civil society. She met with activists from around the world at the last Community of Democracies in Vilnius in July. She met with 17 activists. I was there, from around the world. So she meets with them on a regular basis. And again, our Assistant Secretary for Democracy and Human Rights meets with activists. So it's very much both government, and it's a dual-pronged approach, and meeting with activists. But I would like to say, if it looks like there's something bad happening in the government, U.S. government isn't speaking up, that's not necessarily the case. Again, many times it's happening behind closed doors.
Hi, I want to thank all of you for the work and for your presentations today. They've been very enlightening. I wanted to speak specifically to those of you who are working on LGBT issues, or predominantly on LGBT issues in your organization. I worked with the Albanian activists who began starting a grassroots LGBT movement there, and there were a lot of challenges faced, obviously. My question is, for those of you who are working predominantly on LGBT issues, first of all, how easy have you found it to find funding that's not HIV or public health related funding? Because I know that can sometimes be more challenging. And then secondly, for those of you who are working where it's a component of the work that you're doing, has that had any impact on your relationship to other civil society organizations or other funders or government, the fact that you're also talking about LGBT issues, and how easy is it to publicly talk about LGBT issues in the context of other human rights work that you're doing in the country?
Thank you very much for your question. It's really been very difficult getting funding, LGBT human rights funding, if it's not related or tied to public health or HIV and AIDS. So basically, part of the things we do is try to cut costs when we get HIV funding to be able to do some specific human rights activities, like with the issue of blackmail and legal aid. We try to get lawyers to deal with those issues, even when we don't have funding specifically to do those issues. And then that's part of one of the things that we are looking at right now, because we have huge grants, like the USAID grant is actually the largest in West Africa that we are implementing over the next 5 years. We've done 2 years already, and then we have 3 years to go. But we really do not have any specific funding to do LGBTI human rights work. And this is actually a particular issue within Anglophone West African speaking countries. It's really difficult. In the whole of West Africa, it's difficult to see, there are usually calls for LGBT human rights funding around Africa, but I think it's usually focused on Eastern and then Western Africa, but Eastern and Southern Africa. But Western Africa, Anglophone, is difficult. There is none that has happened so far that I know of, and it's really, really challenging, yeah.
Can I say on that note again that the State Department is creating more and more mechanisms to provide the very targeted assistance that we've heard about that's needed today. We have a very discrete program to support human rights defenders around the world with small emergency grants, very similar to the ones that you do, Nadia. that provides tiny amounts of emergency assistance. We're very discreet about it. I would urge you don't, hopefully this won't pop up in the papers anywhere. It's very discreet, but we do have that. And it goes through our embassies. If people approach our embassies, we're able to do it in a very discreet manner. The Secretary also launched this summer the Lifeline, the Embattled NGO Fund, which is a fund that the United States and 12 other donor countries have created to provide emergency assistance to civil society organizations that are in trouble, as well as small grants to do advocacy work. I'm hoping that you're plugged in. This has just been getting off the ground the last couple of months, but we have a consortium of 7 NGOs in the world who are implementing this, including some in your region. Civicus does it in Africa, Frontline, People in Need, Freedom House, Asian Forum Asia, International Institute for Nonprofit Law, I'm forgetting the separate one. But they are doing exactly that. They have their networks on the ground, and they're saying, there are groups that need help. They need to replace their computers. They need to pay lawyers' fees. They've been kicked out of their office. They need emergency money to do rent a new space. It's the most unbureaucratic thing I have ever seen. We hope to deliver this within the space of a week. And it's a very public one that we've launched because it's standing up for freedom of association and freedom of assembly. It's from the Secretary's recognition of the important role that civil society places, but at the same time that they're the ones who, by being at the front line of this, are also many times in danger. So these funds are available, and I will tip you off, there will be a new LGBT fund that will be launched very soon, but I can't say more about it, but it will be specifically for LGBT projects around the world.
We actually have one question from an online viewer. They would like to know, do any of the panelists or any of your organizations sponsor human rights education courses in the schools in your respective countries?
I'm sorry, the question was, what are there human rights education?
Right, sorry. The question is if any of your organizations sponsor human rights education courses in schools in your respective countries?
In what countries? Their countries?
In their respective countries.
Okay, so human rights, any of your groups sponsor human rights education in the schools in your countries. And I think that's, again, an important one because it has to begin at a very young level to, I think, inculcate this idea that you actually have human rights. There are universal rights, and that your governments, every government in the world has made commitments and obligations to those human rights. So that to be able to do that is very important. So I'll let the panelists speak up.
Well, up to my knowledge, there are no. We had actually, as of 2000, there were several courses that were taught in schools, but they were mostly related to. They were called democratic society. So, and they would have a chapter on human rights, but that was very basic, and it was. I remember very short, for example, in high school. And as I said, in public universities, human rights law as a discipline, not even even at the law schools, does not exist. So it's in terms of this formal human rights education, the situation is very critical.
I'm not sure if I understood the question properly because the voice was very low. But if yes, I can take, as Lana said, if I consider the situation of my country, Rwanda, human rights education in terms of introducing or inserting human rights as a particular curriculum in secondary school or universities does not exist. In our faculty of law at the National University of Rwanda, it's only this year that we started a specific course entitled Human Rights. So for long, human rights was just something we could hear about in radio or a human rights commission talking about it. But now going further to the step of human rights education, I think this did not really exist, formally speaking. And informally speaking, many organizations do not address really the issue of human rights education. And I believe that in Rwanda, if I compare, or I consider all other NGOs we work with, my organization is the first to really target to focus on human rights education. And we are not going to school as asking them to introduce it as particular courses, but what we do is the first step we said, let's go to these secondary schools, for instance, try to train teachers so that they can insert at least human rights perspective in their way of teaching. And we said, let's start by actually encouraging teachers to try to support women or gender. For instance, in their classes, how to support women or girls who are participating in their different classes. So we said, okay, this is not enough because we have a high number of people who are living in rural areas who don't really know even how to read on how to write their own names. But what we can do is actually to just tell them about their rights. If they can know about their right, this is what we call human right education. So informally speaking, it's something which is just taking place. We hope that in long run, it will be formalized. Thank you.
Well, in Colombia, I don't know any program coming from the local government on specifically on human rights. But recently, a coalition of women's organizations get together with some universities in order to launch a program in the 1325 resolution. So that's an example, but coming from the civil society.
If I talk about Nepal, we don't have a specific curricula in school level, but human rights, there is a certain part which falls under human rights, but the title is civic education, not human rights. So there is human rights, concept of human rights, and fundamental rights and right to equality. Many things are there to understand basic things. And if we talk about the university, then human rights course is taken by the law schools, mostly the law schools. And there are human rights, international human rights law, which is mandatory for the students. So there are some universities, law faculty, basically the law faculty has a law program, and they have a human rights law program too. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's the same happens in Nigeria. There is actually, in the university curriculum, there is no, like, a particular course says it's human rights course, but at the law school, they deal more with the international human rights law, and which I did a diploma in as well, so, but there is no, like, going to the schools and then talking about it. And then looking at this would also have to do with the policies, with the education policies, and then trying to get it into the curriculum. So it's maybe it might require more advocacy and then talking about this in terms of trying to introduce it. I know Colombia this year or last year launched a program like that, and there is now a human rights department that deals. There's a course, the human rights course, and I think it would be good also to have it around other universities. But at the moment, there's nothing like that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, panelists and audience, for your questions. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so what I would like to do is to give the panelists, I'll start in reverse order, to have one last chance to share with us some final thoughts, anything you urge us to take away from as we go forward in our working on international development, of something we should keep in mind in particular in this intersection of human rights and development. So I'll start reverse order. Ifeanyi?
Okay. Okay. Basically, one of the things I would want all of us to take home is when we are programming, when we are designing whatever project we want to implement, we should not forget that there are people that their rights are being violated around the world. Not only Africa, but around the world. There are human rights violations around the world, and we should take that into consideration, not only for gay people, but also for women, for sex workers, for drug users, in as much as they use drugs. But then there are lots of people that their rights are being violated, and then we should look at that critically and see how we can overcome human rights issues around the world. And critically, I keep talking about this, it's high time we start getting government officials, head of states, to start talking about human rights issues around the world, cross-country discussions. And then one of the forums I look at where we might also want to look at is looking at the African Commission. The Commonwealth head of states meeting just ended. Those forums are also good to get governments to start talking about these issues. Countries that are progressive and then non-progressive governments, and also see where that can lead us with, because the discussion is very silent. But when we make it open, it becomes an entry point as well of advocacy and also lobbying. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Rita?
Yeah, finally, I'd like to say that human rights and access to justice is the key to establish just society. So I'd like to urge all of us to go hand in hand on these issues. Thank you.
Well, my final thoughts would be, how can we work on prevention? And here I would like, Patricia, if you can take this thought to the Department of State, because regarding the Plan Colombia in Colombia, there's a lot of money that is going to helping our army in the war, and a lot of the human rights violations occur during war. So can be helping what you do, having an officer in human rights on the embassies is great, but also if you work on prevention through the Plan Colombia, not allowing more war, more guns in the country, then we will help not having all those violations of rights in the country.
Yeah, thank you. My last thing to say for this formal meeting would be just, first of all, to notice that human rights and development are closely linked. This is something that we experience in our day-to-day life. When at the end of a legal assistance, you see a girl whose father has been killed and the only cow which stayed has been also taken by someone, when you assist her and thereafter she gets back that cow, she smiles and you feel good. This is a change for even her life. When you see two kids having that alimony for a father who abused their mother, you see the smile. In Rwanda, $5,000, $10, here is nothing. But in Rwanda, it can help you to pay your 1 year health insurance, which only 1,000 Rwanda francs. So when you see all of these things happening, you say really, we need to continue. We have challenges. We want people. We want you to come to us. Many people say that Rwanda now is doing good. Yes, but Rwanda is still a fragile country. We need your support to consolidate what we have now. So if you can come to our organization, I think we have a very big audience here. If you feel that you can support us in linking us with other organizations to strengthen our networking, you are welcome. If you think that you can help us funding activities like our mobile legal aid clinic, you are totally welcome. Please, we beg you, support us. Always tell people about Rwanda. Don't forget Rwanda genocide happened only 17 years ago, and we don't want to have it again. Thank you.
And lastly, Lana.
Well, I just wanted to thank everybody for your attention, and I would like to just ask all of you to, when you do your work, to keep the human rights perspective in your daily life, because it's very important to have that notion that once you're doing, something that you find very natural and it's granted, you may want to consider that there are some parts of the world where, such things do not exist. And actually, I have one small demand for the State Department is to make sure that all the panels that you have, but very panels with high officials, have this kind of gender balance that we have today. if that's possible, to have more women, I think, in decision making, but really at a very, very high level, not in middle management positions, because we've gone there. So I think it's time to move on. So.
Well, I'd like to think this administration has a good track record. We have the Secretary of State as a woman.
Yeah.
One of our chief advisors, Cheryl Mill, is a woman, and the new Undersecretary for Political Affairs, who's in charge of all of our embassies, is a woman.
Of course, but you can do also a lot for others. Yeah, that's my point. I know that you're not having issues, but yeah, you can tell a lot behind closed doors. Even on these issues.
Okay. Well, again, thank you much, panelists. I think this was a fascinating discussion. Again, thank you to SID-Washington for putting this on, IFES, I guess, for the facilities, and for Colombia by bringing in these great people. And thank you, audience, for your attention and your questions. Thank you.